Joining.
Wait for 1 minute. Okay. Thank you and welcome to the 2020 meeting of the Energy Charter Independent Accountability Panel. And thank you for the disclosure from AGL, which we've all read, of course. In starting the meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Brett, I think you know the panel. Claire Petrie, the Chair, Cassandra Goldie, CEO of ACOS, and Andrew Richards, CEO of the EUAA. I will pass to you in a moment to introduce you and your team. But just before I do, the panel wants to do what we've done with every CEO and just acknowledge the incredible year, the unprecedented year that we've just had with fire, floods, the COVID pandemic. And we know the impact that that's had on the businesses and their customers. And you'll probably want to talk about that. But if you would like to make some introductory remarks about your disclosure, highlight any areas that you'd particularly like to draw our attention to, both positive and negative, and then we can open it up for discussion and questions. So I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Claire. And joining me here in support is David Bland, our customer advocate, and Amanda Kennedy, head of customer policy. I do have an opening statement I would like to read in. It also creates a good record for us to use as well when we're talking. So if with your indulgence, it's reasonably short. This year has been a year like no other, and I am proud of the way we have supported our customers while we've managed through the crises of drought, bushfires, and now COVID-19. Our employees have shown up day after day, knowing the essential service we provide by keeping the lights on and the gas flowing, and we're proud that we've kept them safe through the process as well. Let me begin with vulnerability. Earlier in the year, we changed the way that we think about vulnerability. We used to talk about vulnerable customers, generally meaning those facing economic and social disadvantage, but the fact is that any customer can experience short or long-term periods of vulnerability or financial hardship. This can be due to bereavement, illness, family violence, loss of employment, drought, bushfires, or, as demonstrated over the last 6 months, due to something completely unexpected like the global COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has meant that large numbers of people needed our help, many for the first time. We've had to be accessible, we had to be agile and responsive. That's what is expected of an essential service like ours, and we rose to that challenge. Our proactive offers were for unqualified, fast-tracked access to support all of our residential and SME customers. We also had to be responsible to customers and not load them with unmanageable deferments. While the formal support program ended at the end of July, we remain committed to working with our customers to provide them with the support that they need to ensure that they manage through this difficult time. Last year, when we met, I acknowledged that we had sometimes lost the customer perspective in our decision-making and that we're working hard to address this. I made a personal commitment to close the gap between where we were and what the community expects from us. Our participation in the Energy Charter has been just one of the ways that we have worked towards exceeding rising community expectations, as well as embedding a true customer culture at AGL and ensuring the customer perspective is always at the centre of our decision making. We have seen improvement in key metrics such as Net Promoter Score and RepTrak, which is encouraging, but we acknowledge that there is more to do. Social licence is one of AGL's 3 strategic priorities, along with growth and transformation. And over the past year, our social licence program has focused on 3 areas: being a purpose and values-led organisation, recognising customers for their loyalty, and partnering with the communities where we live and work. We are now well into the delivery of our FY21 program, which has a strong customer focus aligned to the principles of the Energy Charter. We've also created a new team in the business, Customer Experience and Advocacy, which David heads up, with the specific purpose of ensuring that the voice of customer is heard across the organisation, challenging our internal processes and influencing decision-making as it occurs. We are continuously listening to our customers to understand their experience and identify their pain points. We also have our Customer Council, which brings different voices and views into the business. We introduced a new question into our employee engagement survey this year to ask whether AGL consistently factors the customer into decision-making. 69% of people across our business and 81% across our customer markets business unit agreed that we put the customer at the centre, which is very encouraging. But it can be improved and will be a metric that we will track over time. Our people are the best gauge of whether we deliver on this promise. I'm looking forward to our discussion today about the Energy Charter and how we are working to not only meet but exceed customer and community expectations. Chair, happy to answer any questions you might have.
Look, that's fine, and you've opened up a lot of issues there. And given the emphasis on the vulnerability of customers, when I entirely agree with your definition that anyone, we no longer talk about vulnerable customers. It's customers with a vulnerability, because anyone can face vulnerability at any time in many different forms. But because you have raised that, and I think that is a key issue, I might pass to Cassandra first to take up that question, because it has emerged as a real issue for the panel and the businesses over the last year. So,
thanks, Claire. Thanks, and good morning, Brett. Thank you very much for the disclosure and for the range of measures that you really highlighted about this desire for the business to have a very strong focus on vulnerability at the core of what it means to put customers at the centre of the business, because that's really what it's about. And there's a few things I wanted to just pick up in your disclosure, if I could. You've made reference here to that you are working on early signs of vulnerability for customers and being on the front foot to prevent people from getting into greater difficulty. I mean, I'm noting that in your metrics at the moment, we're not getting a rapid increase in, for example, the debt levels, average debt levels amongst customers, but on any analysis, we can predict that is not likely. We are likely to see an increase in debt levels because of what's happening to incomes and, for example, the risks over housing, this next stage we're in terms of the profile of households. So I wanted to understand what you're actually doing, what the metrics are you're using to identify early who is getting into difficulty and how you are responding to that.
Yeah, yeah, and I might invite David in a second just to help with the detail, but we train our call centre reps to look for indicators of hardship or issue. So that may be trigger words, that may be patterns of way customers are calling or not calling, that may be in the way that they're paying. And when they pick up on these triggers, they'll either try and deal with it themselves directly, or we've got specialised people and teams that sit behind them that can pick it up. The balancing act always that we're trying to manage is a debt deferred is not a debt avoided, and it doesn't help a vulnerable customer to have an enormous debt pile up, because that's a burden, not just financially but mentally as well, that weighs on them. So a lot of what we're seeking to do is pick up on those triggers early on, get to those people and try and set up some kind of payment plan so that they're staying on top of it rather than letting it get out of control. But David, do you want to add anything on specific measures?
Certainly. Look, Cassandra, great question. In fact, we're actually about to do a trial to expand our predictive hardship capability. But just to give a bit of context of some of those trigger events that Brett's alluded to, if a customer has 2 or more late payments, has 2 or more broken payment plans, might have even received a disconnection warning notice, or has had a 30% increase in consumption year on year, we send a range of notifications to that customer to make sure they're aware of the support that we have available. So last year, I think we sent in the order of over 326,000 offers to customers. And as I said, we're about to go into a trial to do a little bit more to really understand what we can do to provide incentives to help customers stay on top of their consumption.
So David, can I check, so you're therefore using data analytics in terms of your predictive assessment of hardship risks?
Yes, that's right.
Brett, you sort of, it sounded to me like that was more the reactive, you know, you've got somebody on the phone and you're in a discussion with them already, but given the scale of what we think we're facing, having the data analytics help in terms of being more on the front foot about informing customers of what's available. So that's really great to hear that, David, actually. I think as a panel, we're looking for, do we get some consistency here across the businesses about, you know, what would be seen as routinely key indicators that people are getting into distress. So have you published that work in any way? The, you know, the kinds of, like you're talking about the 30% increase in a bill in a particular quarter. That's as an example, yeah?
Yeah, certainly we haven't published the criteria that we've used, but it's certainly something that we're looking at and refining to work out what is best indicators for that predictive hardship. So we've got some machine learning capability that's also enhancing that as we move forward.
And then can I just ask, of course, one of the ongoing challenges here is making sure that people are actually accessing the supports that are available. And you know, we're very aware that we've got large numbers of people and households who have never had to navigate these systems before. And there's a real risk that people will just not be getting access to the rebates and concessions. So are you able to, what we're looking for is, again, proactive assessment of whether people are getting access to what they should be in terms of reducing the sort of the bill size. What are you doing on that front to proactively make sure customers know, and you're checking that your customers are actually on the arrangements they should be on?
I know we do everything we can to steer them in, but David, you've probably got the detail better than me.
No, look, we actually have gone a step further there, Cassandra, to actually help customers who are eligible for state-based concession support. So a lot of our agents actually will work with customers and proactively help them complete the application forms, whether that's for ERG support or in Queensland, some of the concession support available. So we recognise that for a lot of customers that we're helping, they find it really difficult to navigate some of those state-based application processes to access that support. So we're very conscious of going a step further, actually helping them make the applications themselves with our support.
Do you do say random auditing of your customers to check that, you know, percentage of customers identified that were not on plans or, you know, accessing concessions that they should be?
Well, we do require a degree of engagement to understand their eligibility. So where a customer engages, that makes it really easy. It's really tough for us if a customer's not actually engaging with us to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think your limiters, just remembering, will be what information we can collect and how we can use it. And so, you know, with privacy laws and all sorts of things, there'll be a limit to knowing customers in hardship, particularly if you pick up on the definition we talked about at the beginning. You know, if you've just gone bankrupt, it's probably quite observable that you're in hardship. But if you suddenly fallen ill, you know, very hard for us to know that. Just to take two extreme examples, very simplistically. The thing that we always emphasise, and I know as an industry we always talk about, is saying to people, if you're in any kind of difficulty, pick up the phone and talk to us, because that's the, and I know it's, you know, the pushback is always, well, can you go out and hunt them and find them? But unless I go and door knock, you know, 4 million customers individually, finding them is hard if they don't contact us. And so we've got to keep that message reinforcing. And I know through support groups as well, that's a key thematic that they use. If they talk to us, all of these processes can swing into place very quickly. If they don't talk to us, we are trawling through the data that we've got for indicators, but there's a lot of stuff that we will never know and shouldn't know, you know, because that overlaps with privacy.
Yeah, conscious of that, of course, just in terms of your capability to potentially do those kind of random audits to track change in terms of the improvement. You're working on processes to improve, ensuring your customers have got access to these kinds of concessions. How do we track over time? Whether that is, you know, what you're doing is succeeding. We're just looking at that overall for the businesses involved in the charter work, because it's that's a core one for us. But can I just on the, and then I'll of course pass back to Claire. Very interested to see the range of measures you've got going around, of course, energy efficiency and, you know, helping to ensure that we've got households, particularly those that, you know, may be struggling to get access to retrofitting, etc. What I want to get a sense from you of what is, in terms of scale of this. These are huge challenges for us nationally to get people, particularly in the rental sector, involved in, you know, accessing these kinds of benefits, and there's huge equity issues. So could you just speak to the work you're doing in terms of getting scale and the role of AGL in, you know, trying to make sure that we've got people accessing the best of the technologies available?
So I guess sounds like you're separating the kind of more behavioural things, you know, close the window in a cold day, and the more basic things like change your light bulbs, which an individual can do. I mean, we provide lots of advice on that, and we've just launched another online energy coach, you know, to try and give people access to the best tools that we've got there. Beyond that, you know, the bigger waves of things that people think about are more efficient appliances. So there we can give people advice on checking their appliances and what that might mean, but we're not in the business, I guess, of supplying new fridges, but we can certainly give people advice on you need a new fridge. Solar panels and later batteries are the next big things that are rolling through. We run with different government initiatives around the country, different access plans to get people into solar panels. Batteries don't work yet economically. They're at the fringe, but I think wave that will come through. And so that'll be the next thing that we'll be focusing on.
I think what I was trying to get to, Brett, there was, I mean, many of the companies have kind of what I'd describe as showcase type examples of trials, testing things, but to what extent are we getting scale as a, you know, as a big sort of provider here, where do you have a plan about the scale of, you know, scaling up access?
Yeah, well, I think I'll give you a good example. Our Peak Rewards product that we're driving. There's a real dollar saver there. But I'm trying to, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I think that's potentially worth to a customer, I think up to $100 a year from memory is what they can get. It's a big dollar on what can be modest bills. We're about to go from that being a trial, but I think it had, David, was it 20 or 30,000 in Vic? I'm trying to remember.
30,000, I think was the number.
Yeah, so that was the trial size, and we're now about to launch that nationally from memory, certainly New South Wales. I don't have the facts in front of me, but that's where we'll be encouraging customers, all of our customers, to ramp, and we're targeting, you know, I'd like to see that in the hundreds of thousands. And there's a great example of, as a customer, you don't have to arrange a piece of physical change. If you're a renter, you can access that just as easily, you know, as an owner. It's real dollars in your pocket if you want to participate, and it's as simple as if you sign up, you know, just let us know. You can do it on the app, I think, from memory. Sign up in a couple of clicks, and then when we send you an email or a text, to say it's a big day today, would you mind turning your air conditioner down for a few hours? If you participate, then you'll get, you know, whatever it is. I think it's $5, $10. I'm trying to remember, David, per event. You'll get immediate monetary reward. There's good examples of where easy to access, easy to understand, easy to participate, and we're driving to scale.
And Cassandra, that's up to 1 million smart home customers too. So there's real scalability with regards to that.
And it's just very conscious, I think, that it's often in these kinds of, where it's again relying on customer engagement, that the less distressed customers are the ones most likely to engage. You know, that often is the way it works, that in terms of, you know, so how you build in targeting when you're scaling up to these kinds of measures, which, as you say, can actually really significantly reduce the size of people's bills. So can I just, and finally, and then I'll go back to you, Claire, we are at the moment, as I say, you know, we're noting that the debt levels are not going through the roof yet. Have you done any sort of scenario planning about what could be coming, potentially a tsunami of people getting into significant debt distress, you know, associated with housing costs, associated with what's happening to income supports declining, job seeker, job keeper?
Well, yes. So, as a responsible business, we sort of model all sorts of futures, and it is something that worries us that things in the last 6 months have probably gone better than a lot of people expected. I think JobKeeper money and the like, there's kept payments flowing. And the other observation I'd make, and I can't remember the exact stat, but I think it was something like, might have been 90% of people that went on to that COVID-19 support program that we ran were people who'd never been on a hardship program before. So these are people that are used to paying their utility bills. And so to the extent they had cash in the bank, I think they kept paying. We've got some really good statistics that they've kept their debt broadly under control. As we think about, though, that ramp, I think the thing that we think about is we do have good tools and processes in place for customers in difficulty. We've seen that time and again, even in the last 12 months, unfortunately, we've really had to put those tools to the test. So what we think is it's less about developing extra tools, and it's more about making sure that the tools are scalable if the worst happens and many more people are involved. So there, I think, though, boils down to we've got a lot of people trained in how to help customers in hardship or help them through the process, if you like, to get on to different plans and support. I think we are able to ramp those up. If again, as the worst happens, I think the exposure as a business in the short term simply means you're diverting people from might be revenue generating activities like making sales into customer support activities. But in your hierarchy of need, the first calls are to be dealt to our existing customers who need help. And so that allows us to make sure that those channels are serviced. But I'm quietly confident that we have the ability to ramp. And from what I've seen so far, and I come back to that sort of observation that most people now finding themselves in need of help haven't needed that before, and so they're minded to try and keep on top of their utility bills. That's a great help because it means they are, in many cases, naturally engaging, many cases actually really pleased when we're able to give them some kind of plan or some way through it, rather than just, for people who've never been through a hardship program before, I think there's a fear, when you're ringing up, my goodness, am I just going to be cut off and, treated terribly by the energy company? Finally, it's also an opportunity for us with those customers who are good customers, who just need help through what I hope is a short period of time, to give them reasons to stick with us when they get themselves to better times as well, because we've been there, when they've been through difficult times.
I'd say too, Brett, that all of that preemptive work that you're doing just makes good business sense anyway. It's about debt avoidance and risk management. So it seems to make a lot of sense to do that regardless, but obviously there's a good social aspect to it as well.
Yeah, I agree, Andrew. I've never thought that, good social practices and business need to be or are in conflict. And, once you sort of really peel back what you're trying to achieve and what the customer needs, our interests are usually quite well aligned. A customer doesn't need to have debt piling up, neither do we.
Clearly, I just, Brett, I'm just, because I know you sort of confidence. I just think it's really important we're also as frank as we can be about what may be coming, and then what the role of the company is, and what actually the job of the company is to alert to what you're seeing with customers. We've got Ahuri's just come out saying 1 in 3 renters are in distress paying their rent and other bills and going without food already. And we estimated that if the income support arrangements go back to where they're currently planned at the end of the financial year, will all virtually be up to about almost 6 million people in poverty. So they're quite, large scale changes to people's income levels. And so, and what's happening around eviction moratoriums and rents is the other part of it. So hopefully you're right, that you're going to be...
Look, let me be clear. I'm not exuding either a sense of I don't know, confidence that things won't get bad, or a comfort in what might happen. Quite the opposite. I am deeply worried, have talked about it in multiple forums and throughout the business. I think, you know, the confidence, if it's there at all, is because we've got well-trained people who are focused on doing the right thing. And we've seen, while we haven't seen 1/4 of our customers suddenly go into hardship and ask for help on the same day, so I can't with absolute proof say that we can manage in the absolute worst of scenarios. I can say with confidence that every test that's been put to us, and there have been some pretty big tests in the last 12 months, I'm very pleased with how our business has stood up. And the feedback that we've got through measures like NPS and RepTrack, and also anecdotally and directly, has to me given me the confidence that we are doing the right thing. And so it is a question of scaling what we're doing if things get worse, rather than radically changing what we're doing. And I think that's important, because one of the things that weighs on my mind is one customer in hardship is going through the same amount of pain as each of the million individuals in a million customers in hardship. So why should the process for one customer in hardship be any different to the million? And it's sort of a backwards way of saying, if I thought I needed to do more for the million, it means I'm letting down the single. And so I believe we're doing the right thing by the single. So we're ready for the million if that were to happen. So far, things are going better than we thought they would, but, you know, plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah. I mean, it's the income support side, I think, because it effectively kept sort of to 50% of what would otherwise have happened in terms of people on the poverty line. So it's quite a big change that'll happen to people's incomes if we don't see further responses at the end of the year. So thanks, Claire. Thank you. Thanks, Brett and David.
Thank you. And just to follow up before I throw to Andrew, look, I accept that it's much easier if customers engage to offer assistance, and you know, there's certainly a need for proactive work, but if customers do put up their hands, it does make it easier. But I note, I think in your report, that you've just added someone to your customer council to represent the interests of culturally and linguistically diverse people. And I think that's a group that may be reasonably hidden in terms of reaching out for help. And I just wondered, in adding that person to your customer council, does that mean that you have more of a focus on CALD communities? And if so, what measures are you taking to try and reach out more to them?
Yep. So again, I'll rely on David to help you with the detail, but we've done, what I've seen is we've done some really good work, even in the last 12 months, around, I don't know, call it accessibility. There might be a better word for that, but accessibility of our services, whether it's through culture, language, or disability, you know, the ability to access what we're doing. And it has been a focus in the background of us to try and make sure that whatever your starting point, you know, you have a way of getting to the tools and a way of getting to us, and vice versa. But David, I know you've been driving a lot of this. Do you want to add a bit of colour?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Look, I'm actually really proud. We worked with Scope last year to develop easy English guides that were really important to support the needs of those that were either disadvantaged or where English was certainly not their first language. So that was a really great journey for AGL to take. We were the first energy retailer to build out easy English guides that really tried to make what for many is quite a complex industry as simple as we could. And we got some great feedback around that. And that was really well received in the market. And so much so that we shared that with the industry, because it's not something we feel is proprietary. We think it's a genuinely good thing for the sector. Really proud to be able to share it across the industry. So that's one. I think the other is a program called Voices for Power, which is a Better Together initiative through the Energy Charter. And we've been a key driver of that particular program. And that's all about trying to engage leaders in local communities to actually engage local communities around energy in their local language through community forums that they trust. So it's been a bit of a challenge with COVID to convert that to more of a virtual setting, but there's just a couple of instances where we are genuinely sort of committed to this particular cohort of customers.
Thank you. All right, Andrew, I'll pass to you now.
Thanks, Claire. Look, I've probably got a million other questions on what we just talked about, but I've got my couple of things I've got to ask you. So let's get into that. I actually really did like your disclosure statement. Really good use of metrics, and you're one of the few who have actually put up your ombudsman statistics as well in your disclosure, and I think as part of justification of where you're at. So I think that was saves us the trouble of doing it. So thank you.
I think that's the best measure, by the way, in that it's the one that you can't, I don't know, cheat. It's very external.
Yeah, no, look, it's so it was that's it makes it much easier. So a couple of things that are really central and close to my heart as a representative of large C&I. So you're obviously doing a lot of work to embed the charter principles inside AGL, but a company like AGL deals with a lot of agents and brokers and other people, sort of third parties external to the business. What are you doing to I guess, roll out the charter principles with those agents so that as them representing you as your agent, you're still getting the same result that you're expecting from the charter?
Look, I think first and foremost, Andrew, it's a good question. We're very picky about who acts as our agent. We led the way, geez, it must be nearly 10 years ago, out of door knocking, you know, in the eastern states. We were the first to call that and sort of drag the industry out. And ever since, you know, we've had a mania for being very clear about who acts on our behalf and how they do it. I've got to pick my words a little bit with the recent Click acquisition that we made. You know, we're unpicking different relationships there, and I can say carefully that we're applying the right yardstick to what we expect of behaviour for anyone who acts in our name. So the result is probably a lot less third-party people that can purport to act in our name, and a lot more in-house management of it. But to the extent that it goes on, we spend a lot of time reviewing both at a contractual level, building into contracts levels of service that we expect, you know, meet our standards, and you know, behind those standards sits very comfortably and consistently with the principles of the charter. And then we also make sure that we enforce, you know, what we put through in those standards. And you know, at the end of the day, when you employ humans, both internally and externally, mistakes will be made on occasion. Some of them will be genuine human error, and we'll own our mistakes and fix them. Some of them will be stepping outside the rules of the road that we've set up, and when we find instances of that, we don't tolerate it. And so in doing that, I think I'm much more confident today than I've ever been, you know, about the quality of the people who represent us, and by extension, I would say, therefore, you know, how they live, if you like, what's in the charter. But I'd come back to also saying, though, at the heart of what goes on, if it's really important, almost always it's an AGL employee that's driving it as well.
I think you're involved in the Better Together initiative around the broker code of conduct as well. I think so.
I think we are, but I'm not across that one in detail. So David's nodding and Amanda's nodding. So I'm going to say yes with confidence.
Yeah, good.
It sounds like something we would do.
Yes, no, I think you are. So
thank you, Andrew.
The second question and is around net zero emissions by 2050 and the transition. And if there's one company that we're speaking to, AGL's probably at the bleeding edge of this, and yes. I'm really interested to hear from you guys as to, because we see risks in the transition, and we see that if it's not managed properly, then energy bills blow up, and we actually get more disadvantage at both the small customer end, but also some significant negative impacts at the large customer end that I look after. So the plan inside AGL around transitioning to net zero emissions by 2050 and transitioning the energy market, how do we do that without actually blowing the system up and creating more hardship for everyone?
So I think, so I'll give a brief summary of what's a very long explanation, I suspect. If you have the time, if you haven't seen it, our climate statement that we published at 30 June is a really good read on this topic, because you're quite right. Look, we are by a long way the biggest emitter in the country. We're also the biggest driver of renewable energy. We're about to become the biggest driver, and already are, I think, of battery technology here. So we sit at the heart of all of this. We have a focus where we say, okay, 2050, we're going to be net zero. That's a long way away, but what are the markers of transition and how they manage? We think that the forces of transition, we sort of clump or summarise in three ways. We think transition will be driven by customers, communities, and technology. So I'll come back to customers. If I start at the end, technology is all about, we're seeing new technologies come through that both work in an environment sense, but also in an economic sense. So renewables are now the cheapest form of energy. Storage is really starting to kick, and batteries are coming through. So technology and the cost of technology is going to be a major marker of the pace of transition and your ability to manage it. In the middle there is communities, and communities as they express their desires through politicians, regulators, also for us capital markets, shareholders, debt markets. So the community may well talk about, we want you to go faster or slower. So we've got to engage in all of that. And there are examples around Australia where different representatives of community have different views about pace. So we talk to all of them. And then finally, customer. And I think this is really important that we're customer led. And this is one of the big things that we're driving as well. Customers may well pull through this quicker or slower. And what's been very important to me in the climate statement is we launched a commitment that by the end of this financial year, every single product that we offer will have a carbon neutral option. So we already are there with electricity. Gas isn't too far away. And then we've got a long tail of sort of smaller products that are trickier to sort of get there. But by 30 June, we will have a position where if as a customer, you want to get to carbon neutral immediately, we'll always be putting an offer on the table that allows you to do it. And that sense of choice for customer, I think, is super important. Andrew, I think this will be of interest for resi customers. I think we're up to about 16,000, 17,000 signed up already on the electricity product. It's really easy. It's $1 a week. For C&I, we've got a handful of business customers signed up, but active discussions with all of them. For me, in this first year, it's about building the corporate muscle that we know exactly how to do this and price it. And then we'll get better after that, but we know exactly how to do it. And I think it's particularly in business where the way I think about it is it's our customers who are driving a lot of this change. So the customers of our business customers, what they think of it and how fast or slow they want to go and how they value it will help pull it through. Now, the logic of all of that is it allows us to be balancing, the old trilemma of reliability, cost and carbon. And depending on how those three forces move, quicker or slower, will help us sensibly, I think, plan and drive what we're doing. So we have some very public markers out there, like the closure of coal plants, which I won't waste time here on because I think everybody knows all about them. But we have a lot more immediate stuff to do where finally, if you look at, again, the climate statement and our latest disclosures, in my and the executives, including David's targets, long-term targets in our 4-year incentive plans are measures to reduce carbon, but they are measures that I think are quite sensible and balanced in the sense that they will need to get there. We will need to bring customers along. We'll need to get them signed up to carbon neutral products, and we'll need to put boots on the ground, building renewables and storage to make all this work. So I think we're balancing all of that. Finally, we try and are a strong advocate for how to manage this change. So yesterday I was engaging in the NEM 2025 work that's going on, had several meetings on that. Just as a good current example of where we're debating actively. And again, what I've said to the team is when you talk about that, in this case to the ESB and the like, start from the customer's viewpoint and how they view it. And the reason why that's important for us as an example is things like network costs can be quite a blind spot for us otherwise. Because historically, I think it's always been a blind spot historically for AGL. They've been kind of a pass-through rather than something we had to manage. But I've said to the team, start from the customer's point of view and think about how they feel about their bill and where it's going and what all these changes mean, and then work out our advocacy on that basis. Because if it doesn't work for the customer, it won't be sustainable for us to argue something narrow. So I'll stop there. That was probably a 5-minute summary of a 5-day presentation.
Yeah, look, it'd be good to have a conversation with you guys about post 2025 and all of that. It's just interesting, Brett. You didn't mention government or policy in that, and I think that's a good thing actually, because I guess it indicates that you know what you need to do. You're just getting on with it and being customer led. I think it's something that we're talking to obviously our members about as well.
Yeah, and look, yeah, if I left anything out, it was more because it's a long list. We engage with government, as you can imagine, all the time. I think I'm on the speed dial of most energy ministers. This is a complex discussion that is highly emotionally charged. I'm very mindful of, I think the last 4 or 5 prime ministers have changed because of, far and away, because of climate and energy policy. And so to me, this is a subject of great delicacy because it's about advocacy that sticks and affects real change, rather than is noisy. And so you'll find me giving the same speeches and talk privately, publicly, to every end of the spectrum, so that then when I go in and speak, to government, it's with great authenticity, that it's not something I'm just trying to tell them what they want to hear. Often it's not what they want to hear, and you'll have observed that through the press. But it's balancing the needs of customer as well as climate and the other stakeholders that we're managing. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
Brett, look, we are unfortunately running out of time, and this is a discussion that could go on for a long time. But just before I ask if there are any last questions, turning it back on you from an industry point of view and from your point of view, what would you expect to see our panel call out this year? What would be the main issues that you would expect to see in our report or hope to see in our report?
Look, I think I'd offer 2 pieces of advice. One is to be reasonably succinct, in where you think things should go or what it is that you think things should do. Without being critical of last year, because the first time was always the hardest, a long, complex, detailed and sort of hard to pull apart document makes it hard to focus. So I think what's important is we create a sense of focus. The second observation I'd make is, while a major part of what we're dealing to and what we've talked about here is issues of vulnerability and the like, I'd also be making sure that we're looking at the services for the other 95% of customers, and what is it that we're doing in an end-to-end industry sense to make sure that we're advocating and delivering levels of service and outcome for all customers. And I think that's generally getting better. But I think, C&I, Andrew, is a good example where hardship's a bit tough in business customers. Certainly the bigger you are, the less sensitive the community is to your problems, unless you're a big employer. And the more it is about, levels of service and are you getting a good, cost-effective and well-run service in what we do. So I think these are parts of what we need to think about, that I'd encourage the panel to be thinking about as well, when you're thinking about what is it that we should focus on going forward.
Thank you. Andrew, Cassandra, any last minute questions?
No, it's been very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Brett, just one for me. I was just looking at your corporate governance framework and just noting that it would be, without being able, actually very difficult for me to find who's currently on your board. Just so that maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm.
If you look on our website, it's 2 clicks, or if you look at our annual report, it's 1 click.
Yeah, Brett. So somebody rapidly. I was just trying as you were talking to see who you currently had there. But just we are generally really trying to emphasise how important it is to have a focus on customer vulnerability on the inside of the boardrooms, and if there's work for you to do there in moving beyond the sort of thinking about marketing and customer engagement to what I would call social policy issues, recognising you're an essential service provider. So I'm not commenting on the existing directors, but just highlighting if you think there is work to do there in, you know, bringing that kind of the hard edge of customer experience on the inside of the boardroom.
So I could assure you that the board takes it very seriously and debates it at length regularly. And an outworking of that is, you know, the third plank of our strategy is social license. And at the heart of that, you know, is this.
There is a slight difference in what you mean by social license to having effectively a really deep understanding about the challenges for people on very low incomes on the inside of the corporate boardrooms. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. I can tell you that it's a focus for our board and they talk about it at length.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We are out of time, and thank you for your disclosure. Thank you for this discussion today. And we will meet you next at the CEO Council after our report is finalised.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Catch up.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.